In 2023, conservation scientist James Gibbs reviewed 8 years of data collected on Española, a remote volcanic island in the Galapagos. What he found was not just a small change in vegetation, but a sign that an entire ecosystem was quietly beginning to recover. Years earlier, Gibbs and Washington Tapia Aguilera had built several small wooden fenced plots to keep giant tortoises out. Inside those fences, woody shrubs grew thick and dense, almost sealing off the ground. But outside, where tortoises were free to move, feed, and press their heavy bodies across the ancient volcanic rock, the landscape had opened into patches of bare ground and grassland. The most surprising discovery was the return of giant prickly pear cactus seedlings. This species had barely shown visible reproduction across much of the island for more than a century. From just 15 tortoises, once seen as the last fragile hope of their species, these animals were now spreading seeds, opening pathways, and pulling Española back toward its original form. But how could a few slow-moving tortoises change an entire island? Before everything collapsed, Española was once an island shaped by giant tortoises. More than 10,000 Chelonoidis hudensis lived there, a saddleback tortoise species found nowhere else on Earth. With long necks and shells that curved upward in the front, they could reach high cactus pads, feed on branches, and move across the volcanic terrain for more than a century of life. But their role was not simply to eat plants. Every step they took worked like a form of landscape management. They broke through thick shrubs, opened pathways across the ground, and kept the island balanced between open clearings, grassland, woody plants, and cactus. That balance supported Darwin's finches, mockingbirds, land iguanas, and even the waved albatross, which needed open ground to run before taking flight. Then the whaling ships arrived. During the 18th and 19th centuries, tortoises were taken in huge numbers as living food supplies for long voyages. Feral goats brought by humans made the destruction worse, stripping the island's vegetation. By 1963, researchers could find only 14 Española tortoises left, 2 males and 12 females. If you were a scientist back then, would you believe those 14 animals could still save an entire species? Leave your answer in the comments below. In 1965, the Charles Darwin Research Station on Santa Cruz Island began a bold plan: bring the last remaining Española tortoises into a protected breeding program. The idea sounded simple, but at the time, it was a biological gamble. Eggs would be collected, artificially incubated, and the hatchlings would be raised in safe enclosures until they were large enough to avoid attacks from rats before being released back onto the island. The problem was that 14 surviving animals were dangerously few. Many geneticists feared the species had already lost too much diversity to survive in the long term. With only 2 males and 12 females, the risk of inbreeding was extremely high. Some biologists even considered them functionally extinct, even though a few individuals were still alive. The turning point came in 1976, when a male Española tortoise was confirmed to be living at the San Diego Zoo. It had been taken from the island in the 1930s and had spent decades in the zoo without anyone realizing its true importance. This tortoise was named Diego and was brought back to the Galapagos in 1977. Later genetic analysis showed that Diego contributed to 40% of the young tortoises returned to Española. From one forgotten animal on the other side of the world, Diego became a crucial piece that gave this species a real chance to come back from the edge of disappearance. After feral goats were removed from Española, the island began to recover, but not in the way conservationists had hoped. Without tortoises controlling the landscape, woody shrubs spread quickly. A place that had once been stripped bare now shifted in the opposite direction, becoming too dense and overgrown, with many open clearings disappearing. This became especially dangerous for the waved albatross. These large birds need open ground to run before taking flight, but their natural runways were being covered by thick vegetation. For many seasons, park workers had to clear those areas by hand so the birds could still nest, land, and take off safely. Starting in 1975, the first young tortoises were released back onto the island after years of being raised in protected enclosures. At first, they moved cautiously, stayed close to the remaining cactus patches, and slowly adapted to their old habitat. Scientists kept tracking survival rates, growth, and reproduction. By 2014, the data showed that tortoises had begun breeding naturally on Española. The population was no longer fully dependent on the captive program. But the real question remained: were they actually restoring the island, or were they simply surviving there? To answer that question, in 2015, Gibbs and Tapia built fenced plots that kept tortoises out, then compared them with areas where tortoises could still move freely. After 8 years, the difference was clear. Inside the fences, woody plants grew thick and dense, while outside, the tortoises had opened the landscape into clearer ground. 15 years of satellite images also showed that areas with tortoises were slowly shifting from dense shrubland toward a more savanna-like habitat. Just 1 to 2 tortoises per hectare were enough to create a visible change. And it was not only their movement. Their dung carried seeds hundreds of meters, sometimes more than 4 kilometers. Because of that, Opuntia megasperma cactus began returning, bringing benefits to Darwin's finches, mockingbirds, land iguanas, and the waved albatross. In June 2020, the original 15 breeding tortoises, including Diego, who was more than 100 years old, were returned to Española. The captive breeding program was closed after the population had grown to more than 3,000 tortoises that could reproduce naturally on the island. But this success was still incomplete. By 2020, much of Española was still covered by dense woody vegetation, and scientists estimated it could take another 200 years for the tortoise population to return near its historic level of 10,000 animals. Even so, this story proves something powerful. Tortoises were not just a species saved from extinction. They were the architects of the island. They spread seeds, opened flight paths for birds, maintained muddy ponds, and restored the landscape in a way machines could hardly replace. What part of this story amazed you the most? Leave your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories of nature recovery like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for the next video.